The Levite's concubine. This is one of the most disturbing stories in the entire Bible. A Levite travels to bring back his concubine who had left him and returned to her father's house. After several days of hospitality, they begin the journey home. When night falls, they stop in Gibeah, a town in the territory of Benjamin. An old man takes them in, but then comes the knock at the door. A mob of wicked men surrounds the house, demanding the Levite be sent out so they can rape him. Instead of protecting his concubine, the Levite pushes her outside to the mob. They abuse her throughout the entire night. By morning, she collapses at the doorstep. The Levite finds her there, loads her body onto his donkey, and travels home. Then he does something even more shocking. He takes a knife and cuts her body into 12 pieces, sending one piece to each tribe of Israel. It was a horrifying call to action, forcing the nation to confront the evil in their midst. The tribes were outraged, and what followed was a brutal civil war against the tribe of Benjamin that nearly wiped them out. The story appears in Judges 19, during one of the darkest periods in Israel's history. There was no king, no central authority, and as the text repeats, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. The story isn't hidden because it's obscure, it's hidden because it reveals just how far Israel had fallen. Jephthah's daughter. In Judges 11, a judge of Israel named Jephthah made a rash vow before battle. He promised God that if victory was granted, he would sacrifice as a burnt offering whatever came out of his house first to greet him. Jephthah won the battle against the Ammonites, but when he returned home victorious, it was his only daughter who ran out dancing with tambourines to celebrate. Jephthah tore his clothes in anguish, but he believed his vow was binding. His daughter, upon hearing what had happened, didn't resist. Instead, she asked for 2 months to go into the mountains with her friends and mourn the life she would never have, specifically mourning her virginity since she would never marry. Jephthah granted her request. After the 2 months, the Bible says he did to her according to his vow. The passage doesn't explicitly state whether he killed her or dedicated her to lifelong celibate service at the tabernacle. The detail about mourning her virginity rather than her death may suggest permanent dedication. However, the language of burnt offering strongly implies actual sacrifice. Either way, God never wanted this. Human sacrifice was explicitly forbidden in the law. This wasn't obedience. It was tragedy born from a foolish vow, and an innocent daughter paid the price. Elisha and the 2 bears. Not long after Elisha succeeded Elijah as prophet, he was traveling to Bethel when a group came out of the town and began mocking him. They shouted, "Go up, you bald head!" On the surface, this sounds like harmless teasing, but there's more happening. First, the Hebrew word used can refer to young men or youths, not necessarily small children. They were old enough to know better. Second, "go up" was likely a mocking reference to Elijah being taken up to heaven. They were essentially saying, "Why don't you disappear like Elijah did?" This wasn't about baldness, it was open contempt for God's prophet and rejection of divine authority. Third, Bethel had a history of idolatry and opposition to God's messengers. These youths reflected their city's rebellion. Elisha turned around and cursed them in the name of the Lord. Then 2 bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of them. The text doesn't say Elisha summoned the bears. He pronounced a curse, and God responded with judgment. The story disturbs modern readers, but it demonstrates how seriously God treated the rejection of his prophets during that era. It wasn't about thin skin or overreaction. It was about a nation that had repeatedly spurned God's messengers, and judgment finally came. Tamar and Amnon. This is one of the darkest chapters in King David's family, and it doesn't have a happy ending. Tamar was David's daughter, a royal princess. Amnon, David's eldest son from a different wife, became obsessed with her. But his desire wasn't love, it was lust. Pretending to be sick, Amnon manipulated his father into sending Tamar to care for him. When she arrived to help, unaware of his plan, Amnon forced her to be alone with him. Despite her pleading and warnings about the disgrace this would bring, Amnon raped her. Immediately afterward, his obsession turned to disgust. He threw her out and locked the door behind her. Tamar tore her royal robe, covered herself in ashes, and mourned what had been done to her. Her full brother Absalom took her in and told her to remain silent for now. When King David heard what happened, he was furious, but did nothing. No justice, no consequences, no comfort for Tamar. Years later, Absalom took revenge by orchestrating Amnon's murder. But by then, the damage was irreversible. Tamar lived the rest of her life in silence and sorrow. David's household was never the same. The The story reveals the cost of unchecked sin, passive leadership, and the devastating ripple effects when victims are abandoned by those who should protect them. Ehud's assassination of Eglon. The story of Ehud in Judges 3 is both violent and darkly comedic. Israel had been under Moabite oppression for 18 years under King Eglon, described as a very fat man. The Israelites cried out for deliverance, and God raised up Ehud, a left-handed Benjamite. Ehud crafted a double-edged dagger about 18 inches long and strapped it to his right thigh under his clothing. Since most warriors were right-handed and wore weapons on the left, no one thought to check his right side. Ehud delivered Israel's tribute to King Eglon, then dismissed his attendants and returned alone, claiming he had a secret message from God for the king. Intrigued and arrogant, Eglon dismissed his guards. In the private upper room, Ehud approached and said, "I have a message from God for you." Then he drew the dagger with his left hand and plunged it into Eglon's belly. The text provides graphic detail. The blade and handle both disappeared into the king's fat, and his bowels emptied. Ehud left the sword inside, locked the doors, and escaped. The servants waited outside, assuming the king was using the bathroom. By the time they discovered his body, Ehud had rallied Israel's forces. They defeated Moab, and the land had peace for 80 years. The story is unconventional in every way, showing that God's deliverance often comes through unexpected people and methods. Jael and Sisera. After Deborah prophesied Israel's victory in Judges 4, the Canaanite commander Sisera fled the battlefield in defeat. He arrived at the tent of Jael, wife of Heber the Canaanite, whose clan had peace with the Canaanites. Jael invited him in with apparent hospitality. She gave him milk, covered him with a blanket, and promised to stand guard while he rested. Exhausted from battle, Sisera fell into deep sleep. That's when Jael took a tent peg and a hammer. She quietly approached the sleeping commander and drove the peg through his temple into the ground beneath, killing him instantly. When the Israelite commander Barak arrived pursuing Sisera, Jael led him to the tent and showed him the corpse. The Song of Deborah in Judges 5 celebrates this act in graphic poetry. Most blessed of women is Jael. She reached her hand to the tent peg and her right hand to the workman's mallet. She struck Sisera, she crushed his head, she shattered and pierced his temple. The repetition emphasizes the violence. Jael is praised as most blessed among women for this assassination. The great military leader died not in combat, but in his sleep, killed by a woman who had offered him refuge. The story subverts every expectation about warriors, hospitality, and who God uses to accomplish his purposes. Dinah and the circumcision ambush. Genesis 34 records one of the most violent episodes in the patriarchal narratives. Dinah, daughter of Jacob and Leah, went out to visit the women of the land. Shechem, a Hivite prince, saw her, took her, and raped her. Afterward, he claimed to love her and asked his father Hamor to arrange a marriage. When Jacob's sons heard what happened, they were furious, but responded with deception. They told Shechem and Hamor that they could agree to the marriage only if all the Hivite men were circumcised like them. Shechem and Hamor agreed, and soon every male in the city underwent circumcision. On the third day, while the men were still in severe pain and unable to defend themselves, Dinah's brothers Simeon and Levi attacked. They entered the city, killed every male including Hamor and Shechem, rescued Dinah, and plundered everything: livestock, wealth, women, and children. Jacob was horrified, warning his sons that they had made him a target among neighboring peoples. But Simeon and Levi responded coldly, "Should he have treated our sister like a prostitute?" The story is morally complex. There's righteous anger over Dinah's violation, but the response was genocidal revenge disguised behind the sacred act of circumcision. The text doesn't condemn or approve. It simply records what happened when honor, violence, and deception collided in the ancient world. God sends a lying spirit. 1 Kings 22 contains one of the Bible's strangest and most theologically challenging stories. King Ahab of Israel wanted to reclaim the city of Ramoth-Gilead and gathered 400 prophets who all told him what he wanted to hear. Go to war and you'll win. But Jehoshaphat of Judah wasn't convinced and asked if there was a prophet of the Lord they could consult. Reluctantly, Ahab sent for Micaiah, a prophet who always prophesied bad news. When Micaiah arrived, he first sarcastically echoed the false prophets, but when pressed for the truth, he revealed a disturbing vision. He saw the Lord on his throne surrounded by heavenly beings. God asked, Who will entice Ahab to go to battle so he falls at Ramoth-Gilead? A spirit stepped forward and said, I will go and be a lying spirit in the mouths of his prophets. God said, go and do it. Micaiah told Ahab that his prophets were speaking lies permitted by God to lead him to his death. Ahab ignored the warning, imprisoned Micaiah, and went to battle anyway. He was killed exactly as prophesied. This story troubles readers because it shows God allowing deception. But it's not about God being deceptive. It's about a king who rejected truth so persistently that judgment came through the very lies he preferred to believe. Ahab had spent years listening only to prophets who told him what he wanted to hear. God gave him over to his chosen delusion. Balaam's talking donkey. Numbers 22 records one of the Bible's strangest miracles. Balak, king of Moab, feared the Israelites and hired Balaam, a pagan prophet, to curse them. Balaam wanted the money, but asked God first. God told him not to go. When Balak sent more distinguished messengers with greater rewards, God told Balaam he could go, but must only speak what God commanded. Balaam saddled his donkey and set out, but his heart wasn't right. God sent an angel to block the path. Balaam didn't see the angel, but his donkey did. First, the donkey left the road. Balaam beat her. Then she crushed Balaam's foot against a wall. He beat her again. Finally, she lay down in the path. Balaam beat her a third time. That's when the donkey spoke. What have I done to you to make you beat me 3 times? Balaam actually argued with the donkey, complaining about her behavior. Then God opened Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel with drawn sword. The angel said, if your donkey hadn't turned away, I would have killed you. Balaam realized God's seriousness. When he finally reached Balak, instead of cursing Israel, he blessed them repeatedly. Balak was furious, but Balaam could only speak what God commanded. The story is almost comical. A donkey proved more spiritually perceptive than a professional prophet, and God used an animal to save a man who was walking into death. The Witch of Endor. 1 Samuel 28 records the Bible's only account of a séance, and it raises difficult questions. Near the end of King Saul's reign, the Philistines gathered for war. Saul sought guidance from God through dreams, prophets, and the Urim, but God was silent. In desperation, Saul did something shocking. He asked his servants to find a medium, even though he himself had banned such practices throughout Israel. They located a woman in Endor. Saul disguised himself and visited her at night, asking her to summon the spirit of Samuel, the prophet who had anointed him king years earlier. The woman was hesitant, fearing it was a trap, but Saul promised her safety. During the séance, she was shocked when she actually saw a spirit and realized she was speaking to King Saul. She described an old man in a robe. Saul recognized it as Samuel and bowed. Samuel's spirit asked why Saul had disturbed him. Saul explained his desperation and God's silence. Samuel delivered a harsh prophecy. The Lord had rejected Saul, given the kingdom to David, and the next day Saul and his sons would die in battle. Saul collapsed in terror. As foretold, Saul and his sons died the next day. The woman's shock suggests even she wasn't expecting a real appearance. God allowed this one-time event to pronounce final judgment on Saul. The story doesn't validate seances or necromancy, which the Bible consistently condemns. It shows a tragic king who turned to darkness when he had long rejected the light. Lot and his daughters. Genesis 19:30-38 contains one of the Bible's most uncomfortable narratives. After the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot escaped with his 2 daughters. His wife had looked back and turned into a pillar of salt. Now hiding in a mountain cave, Lot had lost everything: his home, his wife, his wealth, and any sense of normalcy. In this desperate situation, his daughters made a disturbing decision. Believing they might be the last people alive and wanting to preserve their family line, they devised a plan. On 2 consecutive nights, they got their father so drunk he was unaware of what happened. Then each daughter slept with him. Both became pregnant by their own father. The older gave birth to Moab, ancestor of the Moabites. The younger had Ben-Ami, ancestor of the Ammonites. These 2 nations would become persistent enemies of Israel. The Bible doesn't glamorize or excuse this story. It presents it as a raw, honest account of what happens when fear, trauma, and faithlessness converge. The daughters may have acted from panic, believing extreme circumstances justified extreme measures, but their method was sinful, and the consequences lasted for generations. Lot, described elsewhere as a righteous man, is shown here as compromised, passive, and vulnerable. The story demonstrates that even people classified as righteous can become victims of circumstance and poor judgment. It's included in Scripture not as instruction, but as a warning about the tragic outcomes of living in proximity to sin and making decisions based on fear rather than faith. So which intense story shocked you most? Was it the Levite cutting his concubine into 12 pieces? Jephthah's daughter being sacrificed for a rash vow? Or God sending a lying spirit to deceive Ahab's prophets? Drop it in the comments. And if you want more biblical content they don't teach in Sunday school, hit subscribe.